Welcome back. We've got a lot to come on the show, including I'm going to be speaking to the government advisor on food policy who quit his role over a lack of action by the government on obesity. And we're also going to be hearing from the DUP Sammy Wilson in just a minute. I'm going to ask him why the DUP didn't back the Windsor Framework and indeed what the DUP does next. Sammy, you're joining me, I hope, from East Antrim. Can you hear me?
I am indeed, yes, and I can hear you fine.
And you may have heard my first question there, Sammy. Look, the DUP has voted against the Windsor Framework. You've said this week that your party will continue to fight against Brexit trade barriers between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. What are those barriers and how will you continue this fight?
Well, first of all, I think that even the Prime Minister should not have been accepting this deal because it goes against what he said he was setting out to achieve. He wanted to replicate what was in the protocol bill. He didn't replicate that. And the reasons why we're opposed to it are very clear. First of all, Northern Ireland, a part of the United Kingdom, will still be subject to EU laws being imposed, and the government has actually given the EU permission to impose its laws on this part of the United Kingdom. Secondly, and the framework document makes it quite clear, that trade between GB and Northern Ireland, even where that trade is exclusively for people in Northern Ireland, will be inhibited. Every good that comes in, or every lorry load comes in, will have to have 100% checks on the paperwork. 1 in 20 lorries will be physically checked, and the EU at any stage can decide to even up the level of checks if it feels that some goods are leaking into the Irish Republic. So I mean, all of these things. And of course, the government has promised. The government has promised that, well, you can have a block or a break on EU law if you feel it's detrimental to Northern Ireland. Actually, when the SI was examined in detail, it was quite clear that that lock could not be used because ministers could block it. The EU could block it, an arbitration panel could block it. So, you know, even the promise of the break on EU law, it was not in reality there.
But Sammy, when does this end? I mean, Jeffrey Donaldson has talked about your 7 tests not being met. I mean, you're never going to get everything that you want. And your constituents, the people of Northern Ireland, still don't have power sharing. So when does this end? Surely you must just go back to Stormont now for the sake of your own electorate.
Well, I mean, first of all, it ends when, as Unionists, we have secured our place within the United Kingdom. And we are appealing to other Unionists in Westminster to aid and abet us in that fight. I mean, and the second thing, it will end when, as Unionists, we're no longer required through the Assembly to collaborate in diverging ourselves and divorcing ourselves and taking ourselves out of the United Kingdom, because that's in effect what the Windsor Framework leaves us doing, that we would be required to, as ministers in the Assembly, by law, under threat that we're breaking the ministerial code and therefore will be kicked out, we would be required to implement EU laws which are imposed in Northern Ireland, and while knowing that, of course, as we do that, as the Windsor Framework document actually states, the application of EU law will make us diverge further from the country to which we belong. It actually states that in the framework document. So it will end when the union is secured, when we're no longer required to participate in breaking up the union. And, you know, I don't think that that's an unreasonable position to adopt.
But it doesn't look like the union is being broken up. And also that means that then you have to accept, and the people of Northern Ireland have to accept, direct rule from London. For how much longer, Sammy?
Well, the framework document actually makes it quite clear that Northern Ireland will increasingly diverge from the Union as a result of EU law being imposed and as a result of the UK government deciding to change EU laws which currently apply to the rest of the United Kingdom, but which they have stated they wish to change themselves as part of the Brexit freedom. So, I mean, this is not Unionists claiming that the Union will be broken up. the document itself, the government itself, the EU, accept that the application of EU law and the decision of the UK government to exercise, quite rightly, its Brexit freedoms will put in jeopardy the Union. And, you know, if the only leverage we have at the moment is the non-operation of the Assembly, then we will use that leverage.
Sammy, can I ask you something? Because we've had lots and lots and lots of discussions over the course of the last few years about this. Do you regret Brexit? Do you think Brexit was now, in retrospect, a mistake?
No, I don't regret Brexit. What I regret is the spineless way in which the Conservative government, in order to get itself out of its own difficulties, was prepared to treat Northern Ireland differently and have Northern Ireland treated as if Brexit never happened in this part of the United Kingdom. The referendum was a UK-wide referendum. The referendum was for the UK as a whole to leave the EU, and that's what was promised. That's what should have happened. And we had a government that was prepared to abandon part of the United Kingdom. Now, albeit that they argue that they thought that it was only a temporary arrangement and that the EU would play ball in putting together the alternative arrangements which were promised in the political declaration. The EU didn't play ball, and the UK government didn't have the courage to stand up to the EU's breaking of the arrangements which they thought they had agreed with them.
And who do you blame more then when it comes to previous prime ministers? Whose fault is it really? Theresa May's? Is it Boris Johnson for squandering his Brexit opportunities? Or is it Rishi Sunak now for coming up with this deal that you say isn't satisfactory?
Well, first of all, the box that we were placed in was clearly the responsibility of Theresa May. She made an agreement with the EU that there would be no hard border and no checks at all, and no arrangements put in place to monitor trade between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Once she had done that, and once we were in that box, then it was always going to be impossible and very difficult for future Prime Ministers to get that changed. But I still believe that Boris Johnson should have stood by his promise, or if he had been given agreement that this was a temporary arrangement, then as soon as he had got the trade agreement with the EU, he should have pushed to have that temporary arrangement replaced with something which was workable and which kept the integrity of the United Kingdom. So Theresa May put us in the position. Boris Johnson didn't fight hard enough to get us out of that position, and of course Rishi Sunak has tried to change it, made some minor changes to it, but the fundamentals of what Theresa May agreed, and I don't know what her motives were. Did she want to use Northern Ireland to keep us within the remit of the EU single market and the EU customs union, i.e. the whole of the United Kingdom in that? And were we simply used in that way? And then, of course, we're left with the situation we have now today, where the union of the United Kingdom is, I mean, don't forget, terrorists tried to drag us out and bomb us out of the union. And yet
yes.
the union has been put in far more jeopardy by the actions of a Conservative Prime Minister as opposed to the acts of the terrorists who bombed us for 35 years.
But Sammy, do you feel betrayed by Rishi Sunak then? Because there was this impression given about the Windsor Framework that the government would take their lead from the DUP. The DUP had to be happy with it. The DUP are unhappy with it, and still it sailed through Parliament.
Well, I mean, I think that, first of all, he did try to make a difference. He did make some differences, and he has to be given credit for that. But he has not dealt with the fundamental issues, either because he felt it was too difficult or because he felt that the consequences of pushing the EU to deal with the fundamental difficulties were going to be too great. But he certainly hasn't lived up to his own objectives, because don't forget, he was the one who said that the outcome of these negotiations would be to achieve what was in the protocol bill so that the government didn't have to act unilaterally. Clearly he has not achieved anything near what was in the protocol bill.